but I want to start tonight by welcoming everybody to our special Zoom event, Meet with Your MP training workshop with special guest Sue Dwyer from Climate for Change. I'm Heidi Lee Douglas, the Communications and Campaign Director for Australian Parents for Climate Action. I am leading and nurturing our Parent Spokesperson program in the lead up to the federal election. Australian Parents for Climate Action is Australia's leading climate advocacy organisation for parents, carers, families, and all who care about a safe future for our kids. With over 15,000 supporters and 30 local groups from across the political spectrum in every Australian electorate and from diverse socio-economic backgrounds. We are on a mission to increase the political will for climate action by engaging and empowering millions of parents and carers across Australia to advocate for climate action in their communities, in the media, and directly to politicians. So here is how the night will go. Our CEO, Nick Seaton, will provide a brief federal election update. Sue Dwyer will run through her training, which includes a breakout room. And if you have any burning questions you think you'll forget, pop them in the chat and Laura, our community organizer, will track it. Say hi, Laura. Hey, Laura. I'll then run through our MP spokesperson program in a bit more detail to scaffold you in your journey to meet with your MP, including getting you to create your initial email to your MP. So before I go any further, I need to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and sea I'm coming from today, the Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, whose sovereignty over this land and water was never ceded. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and water on which each of you are coming from tonight. AP4CA recognises that there is no climate justice without social justice to our First Nations people. I also want to particularly acknowledge one of the ancestors of where I am coming from, Wulaware Benelong of the Gadigal people. He is described by Paul Daly as a pragmatist, an envoy during the invasion of this land, a husband and a father, a diplomat who also clung to his culture, and the first of this continent's Aboriginal people to travel to England. As a complex, articulate, and he was politically savvy. And I can only imagine the challenges Benelong faced, and he puts our role as stepping up as parent spokes into a humble perspective. So I now pass over to Australian Parents for Climate Action CEO Nick Seaton for a federal election update. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Heidi, and hi all. It's really great that you could join us tonight. So I'm just going to give a quick snapshot of where we're at with the election, assuming that maybe some of you know a lot about politics, maybe some of you don't know a lot about politics. And I'll tell you a little bit about our approach, the approach that we've decided to take to have the most influence that we can towards making the climate as safe as we can for our kids. So we know that an election is likely to be held in May now because we're expecting a federal budget to be announced on the 29th of March, which means that they'll probably give a bit of space after that, and they need a 5-week campaign window. So we're looking at May. The latest the election can be held is May 22nd. And it's something that the Prime Minister gets to decide as to when that will be held, but that's the end of the possible window. We know that, the strategy we've chosen to take as Australian Parents for Climate Action is to look at how we can engage candidates and incumbent MPs on the issue of climate change using our experience and our connections and our community and our influence as a movement of parents. And the reason why we've decided to do that, as opposed to, say, for example, trying to change the way everyone votes or trying to create a big narrative that everyone believes in, is because we think that actually we can actually leverage a lot of influence over candidates, especially in marginal locations where there might be a very tight margin between different possible winners from the last election. And we think that the federal government and Labor are going to be spending a lot of time and paying a lot of attention to what people think in that space. We know that parents, especially working mums in particular, were found to be very influential in the outcome of the previous election. And we know that both sides of politics are going to be relying on different elements of the parent vote. We are also going to be thinking, how can we build really constructive long-term relationships through this election? So rather than just to this election, we want to be thinking through this election into the next term, how we're going to be working with MPs, how we're going to be getting ready for the following term and the following election, and making sure that we're on a solid trajectory towards ultimately bipartisan support for climate action. And bipartisan support has been lacking. It's only recently started to surface. In fact, the rate of change on climate in the last few months has been astonishing, even though it's nowhere near enough. It is far more than we've ever seen before in Australian political and cultural history. And to see both parties agree that zero emissions target or a net zero emissions target is going to be part of their platform is a big step forward, even though it's nowhere near enough and not fast enough. But we are encouraged by the fact that these changes are starting to occur. Anything could happen, and it's important to note that we can't really rely on a particular election outcome. And this is why we are focused on bipartisanship, because if we rely on one, you may have experienced the sensation of winning something. Maybe in 2007, we got some great climate policies with the Rudd government election, which were later repealed in 2013 by the Abbott government election. And then we've had toing and froing in the Liberal leadership. It's not safe enough for us to bet our kids' future on picking one side, nor is it smart enough when it comes to getting great lobbying results. So we're going for bipartisanship. We know that the LNP could win. We need to be prepared for that. We need to remember that they are the incumbent government during COVID, and that they also will have the upper hand on releasing the budget in March for the federal budget. Even though it might not, kind of go with their ideology, they may increase public spending. We know that Labor could win, but they would need to win 7 more seats and lose 0, which is going to be a big feat for them to pull off. They're currently in the latest news poll, they are polling slightly ahead, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a shoo-in. And we know that there has been a little bit of it's time factor, because people start to worry, well, does the incumbent government deserve another decade? And that may be a factor in how people think about Labor, but it's not enough. We really need to see how that's going to play out. And we also know that there could be a hung parliament. It's something we've seen in the past, and it's exciting to see a lot of stories around new independents, in particular, really strong independents coming forward as part of a movement there. As well as, we've seen historically the Greens vote can be strong, although it's not necessarily sound as a pound. And we also know that One Nation are also doing really strong, and that other right-wing independents and the UAP are also planning on spending a lot of money and playing pretty full-on tricks. So none of that's safe either. So we're going to take the safe bet and go for long-term bipartisanship that is way more durable. And frankly, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we had that now? So we're going to be working towards that for the long term. And that's partly why it's so important that all of you on this call tonight can come with us and join that journey and be part of that force for change in actually building long-term constructive relationships that are solutions-oriented and really about making sure we have the durable commitment towards climate change policies that are going to last, which we're starting to see the beginnings of, and we really need to accelerate and ramp that up. So thanks for joining the call. I'll pass back to Heidi. I hope that's a useful little backgrounder on why we're here and what we're going to do.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. Very exciting to have you all. And thank you. We now have 43 people with us. We probably have a few more join as the night goes on. So I want to now throw to Sue Dwyer. She is the MP Engagements Group Coordinator for Climate for Change. And I'm very grateful to Sue for putting her time into creating what I think is a very remarkable presentation that she'll be sharing with us tonight. So thank you and welcome, Sue.
Right.
Thank you.
So you can all see it. Sorry about that. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to speak to you tonight. I'm speaking to you from Naarm on Wurundjeri land in the Kulin Nations, otherwise known as Melbourne. So hands up if any of you have visited your MP already. Okay, so I can't see everybody on the screen at the moment, so I'm just going to assume that there are quite a few of you, and well done. So it's not so scary to do. After you've done it the first time, it gets easier. But I'm going to try and help more of you to brave up and do this by giving you some tips to make the process as simple as possible. And hopefully those of you who have already been will learn a few things as well. So don't worry too much about taking notes for this bit. I'll make my slideshow available for you at the end with some of my speaking notes as well. So a bit about me. Hang on, I was going to tell you what I was going to do first. So I'm going to run through who I am and why I'm doing this. Then talk about how we access our democracy to influence political decision making, and then a bit about visiting our MPs, so how to prepare, some tips on what to expect, with a few examples thrown in. And then we're going to think about what's next for you with a bit of a breakout activity. And then after Heidi has spoken, we'll do some Q&A together after that. So a bit about me. So I'm a writer, editor and former school teacher, and the parent of 3 now grown-up children, one who's coming home from the UK tomorrow after 4.5 years away. So I'm pretty excited about that. I live with my partner, musician son, 5 chooks and a veggie garden in the federal electorate of Cooper, which is in inner city Melbourne. I'm passionate about sustainability, climate action and social justice, and desperate to have a safe and sustainable future for my children and the planet, like the rest of you. So when I realised climate change was the most serious threat facing humanity, I couldn't sit back and do nothing. So once my children were all adults, I quit teaching to focus on climate action. So why do we need to be pressuring MPs now? Well, Nick's given you quite a few reasons. My reasons would basically be because our house is on fire, as Greta says. The science says Australia's warmed more than the global average. We're around 1 to 1.4 degrees hotter already, bringing us more intense weather events and catastrophic bushfires, floods and droughts. And unless we do something, it's only going to get worse. So with the federal election no later than May next year, we want to make climate a federal issue so we can get emissions down at the speed and scale we need as soon as possible and have a safe future for our kids. And I understand that your organisation has a more specific goal of making solar our schools a bipartisan commitment. So whoever wins the election, hopefully that will get up. So here's just a really brief reminder of the system we're dealing with. I've become aware when I'm speaking that most people have a bit of an idea about what goes on in Canberra, but there's gaps in all of our understanding. So this isn't comprehensive, it's just a little bit of a quick overview. And we've become a bit disillusioned with our parliaments and politicians, and lots of people have switched off, and we think we've got no influence on what happens in Canberra. But in Australia, our democracy is actually pretty robust. And as citizens, in Australia, we have incredible access to our MPs and can speak to them personally if we make the effort. So the 151 members who sit in the House of Representatives are our local MPs and the ones you're most likely to visit. And this is the House where most legislation is introduced and debated. We can ask our local MPs to speak for us in Parliament and ask questions of the ministers on our behalf. This gets things on the public record. In very simple terms, when a proposed piece of legislation is passed in the lower house, it goes to the Senate for review, where it can be accepted, rejected or modified. If it's rejected, it fails. If it's modified in this house, it goes back to the lower house and then goes to the Governor-General to be officially made into law. And because the government doesn't have a majority in the Senate, decisions often come down to the crossbenchers and minor parties who do deals to get things they want. So people like Pauline Hanson and Jackie Lambie have a lot of power in the Senate because they have the balance of power. Most state governments are pretty similar. They have upper and lower houses. The exception is Queensland and also the territories, who only have one house. And federal, state and local governments all have different areas of responsibility, and we need all our governments to be making bolder decisions on climate. Our individual, community and business actions are vitally important. So all the things we do day to day count, but they're not going to bring emissions down at the speed and scale we need. So we need governments to make the big picture decisions to make things happen faster, which means we need to step up as democratic citizens and demand our governments act. So if you want to get some action on an issue, you need to think about which level of government is appropriate to lobby. And if you have trouble getting access to the person you need, you can sometimes start with a different level of government and ask them to help you contact the relevant MP in the relevant level for you. So Sometimes if you've got access to your federal member but not your state, and it's a state issue you want to influence, then you can ask your federal member to help with an introduction for you. But really, every single area, federal, state and local government, involves climate. Climate affects absolutely everything, whether it's through the transport it uses or construction materials or energy use. And we need every government department and policy area to be looking through a climate lens. And obviously schools and education are one of those areas. This is a super quick overview of how government work and the influences on any one MP. So our federal and state parliaments are all a variation on this diagram. The dots are our MPs, most are in parties. So there's larger and smaller parties, and there's a few independents floating around in there. And the red cross is one MP. And all the things on this map influence an MP's views and actions. So coal and gas lobby groups might have lots of money to throw around, but as constituents, we have the ultimate power. So don't forget that. We voted them in to represent us, and we can vote them out again. The problem is at present that the pressure on MPs and parties from fossil fuel lobbyists, big party donors, and organisations who don't want action on climate for various reasons is more than that from those of us who do want action. So we have to change the tide by making more noise to shrink the blockers' influence and grow the voice and pressure for climate action. By more of us speaking out and speaking to our MPs, we're helping to do this. Okay, now I've just realised that I forgot my very first slide, and I'm going to go back and tell you a bit about me before I continue, because I think it's important to know some of the context for this. So I'm sorry about that, but back to me for a minute. So for the past 5 years, I've been a volunteer with Climate for Change, which is a not-for-profit organisation seeking to grow the social momentum for government climate action ahead of the next election. And under their umbrella, on the back of experiences that I've gained from meeting with MPs, I set up MP engagement groups, which are designed to skill up and encourage people to communicate with MPs on climate issues. You can find out more about these on our website. And I kind of accidentally fell into MP activism after visiting my federal MP about 4 years ago. Until then, I talked to lots of people about the power of citizen democracy, but I'd never actually visited an MP myself. And a sign I saw once at a climate rally said, I kept waiting for someone to do something. And then I realised I was someone. So on a total whim, deciding it was time to brave up, I turned up nervously to a cafe in response to a Facebook request asking for volunteers to visit my then local member, David Feeney, about Adani. And about a dozen other people had turned up as well. And the group decided they needed a main spokesperson. And I was the only person there with a notebook and pen. So for some reason, everyone looked at me. So initiation by fire. But luckily when we went in, I only had to introduce the group and say why we were there, and then more confident people took over and I could relax a bit. So Feeney gave in to our pressure. He wrote and signed a short statement opposing coal and agreed to a group photo with him holding a Stop Adani sticker. We asked him to post the photo and statement on social media and also to speak in Parliament about coal and climate. The Guardian saw his tweet and ran a story. He spoke in Parliament and there were more news stories. Now this was pretty incredible. For my first visit to an MP, I was amazed at how much we had achieved. So after his resignation, due to dual citizenship, Jed Carney won the by-election in 2018. And crazily emboldened by my previous experience, a friend and I visited her about 2 weeks after the election. We were pretty nervous, but we'd prepared some talking notes, which really helped. Our ask in that meeting was for Jed to include the need for stronger climate action in her maiden speech. And she admitted to us that she didn't really know what to say, but she took her request pretty seriously. And I nearly fell off my chair when she asked if I'd help her with that part of her speech, though I didn't seriously think I'd ever hear from her again. However, a couple of weeks later, she emailed me asking for comments on her draft. And so I gave her some comments. I actually rewrote a couple of paragraphs, adding in some things I thought she'd left out, like the Great Barrier Reef and coal and a few other things. And she actually included most of what I wrote. And it was absolutely amazing listening to it when she gave her speech in Parliament. I'm not anybody special. I'm just a, average citizen. And she let me help her with her maiden speech. So it's amazing what can happen sometimes. So since then, with other friends, I've visited Jed regularly. We've helped inform her on climate, and she's educated us on the realities of Parliament and party politics. She's introduced us to Mark Butler and more recently Chris Bowen, who's the current Shadow Climate Minister. She's funded electorate action on climate to help get residents off gas. And she's facilitated state action by helping pressure the local state MP on our behalf. It's a pretty fruitful relationship, though we keep on pushing her to do even more. During a meeting with Jed and Mark Butler, just before the 2019 election, I asked what was the single best thing we could do to make MPs take notice. And Mark said, make a lot of noise, which he then defined as writing, visiting and calling, and said even a humble email could be very powerful. Other MPs have endorsed this, and staffers in several MPs' offices have told us if people knew how seriously correspondence was taken, they'd write more often. So these experiences have inspired me to encourage others to engage with their MPs as well, because imagine the change we could influence if lots of us stepped up and visited our MPs and told them what we want. So now I help other people make a lot of noise with their MPs. And since then, I've visited senators, state MPs and local government councillors. And I've also given lots of talks like this one. And it's pretty productive and rewarding. And I'd love to inspire more of you tonight to step up and engage with your MP. So now I'll go back to where I was. So I was looking at, this is one MP, this is the influences on them. And there are more blockers with money, the big profits, the big lobby groups putting pressure on MPs than there are people who want action on climate. So we have to change that and shrink the pressure from the people that don't want change on climate, the coal lobby, places like that. We can pull our money out of, we can buy green power and pull our money away from fossil fuels, things like that. And then we can put more pressure on our MPs together to make a difference. Does people power work? What impact does this really have? Well, some MPs can be unresponsive, but most are going to take notice because they represent us and they care what we think, because they want our votes. And they can't know what we think unless we tell them. So do not underestimate the impact you can have. Look how the message on climate has changed over the past 3 years. Every little bit of contact with MPs, every person standing up and saying they want more action has helped shift their views. It's all over the news now. Every paper, pretty much every news bulletin has something in it about climate. And the more of us who demand action, the more likely we'll get change. So also, for every person who actually contacts their MP, it represents many, many more who feel the same way but weren't confident enough to do it. So comms people in ministerial offices say that the ministers take correspondence pretty seriously, and it works. It really works. So just one example, the climate emergency declaration movement started from a small group of people in Darebin, which is a local government area in Melbourne, quite close to me. So now there's more than 2,000 major cities, municipalities, and even whole nations around the world who've declared a climate emergency. In Australia, more than 100 local governments and most capital cities have declared climate emergencies as a result of people like us demanding it. And the Labor Party unanimously voted to declare a climate emergency at their National Policy Platform Conference in 2018, so the one just before the last election. And that was the result of lots of people pressuring Jed Carney to put the motion. So now we need them to translate that into policy and action. And there's heaps of examples. Another one is the thousands of people lobbying Victorian state government MPs last year who successfully stopped the proposed AGL gas terminal in Western Port Bay. And I know there's people in Geelong who are using that as an example to try and stop the gas terminal at Corio. Jackie Lambie is another great example. She often asks the people of Australia to tell her which way they think she could vote, as she feels the responsibility of often holding the casting vote in the Senate. So she's been influenced to vote for refugee rights. And just last week, she killed the bill for the voter ID, on the voter ID bill for the election. So if you're not on her mailing list for this, go to her website and get on it, because she often sends out emails saying, how should I vote on this issue? And you want to be telling her how you want her to vote. So there's different ways of engaging with your MP, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and some of them have greater influence and impact than others. So petitions and online tools, they still show the number of people supporting an issue, and MPs do take notice of these. And when there's submissions, when governments call for submissions on particular things, or they have a parliamentary committee, sometimes these petitions and email campaigns count for a lot. However, the more personal the engagement, the stronger the influence. So individual emails are much more personal and immediate, and they're also the easiest for MPs' offices to respond to. Snail mail letters can work in specific instances, like the children drawings campaign was a pretty good one. But in general, they're slower off the mark. They can take a week or two to arrive, and they're much more time consuming to process and respond to. Calling's pretty immediate, and it's also, you can just do it on the spot. You read something in the paper, it upsets you, you call them straight away and tell them what you think. However, meeting face-to-face is the most powerful and influential, and even more powerful if you can build an ongoing relationship with your MP and visit regularly. This is just a snippet from the back of my last electorate newsletter. It was just in the corner on the back page. And I just thought I'd put it there because every federal member has a responsibility to us to represent our needs and interests in Parliament. And she's actually put it there in red and white. But it's the same, every MP, that's their job. It's in their job description. So get out there and ask them to act on your behalf. You have to tell them what you want or they're not going to know. So now for the nitty gritty. So if you decided to go and talk to your MP, where do you start? So first you have to decide who you're going to go with. You're going to go with a friend or in a group. I'd recommend going in a group that's not too big, but sometimes a large group can work. It just depends on you and how you're going to manage it. I've got a small group of friends I visit MPs with, but usually only 2 or 3 of us visit each time. But it does vary a bit. Sometimes there might be 5 of us go at a time. And we usually start by sending an email request for a meeting first, in which I'll state the broad issue of what we want to discuss. But I keep it brief and I don't go into a lot of detail. Personally, I don't see the point of telling them everything before we go, so I keep it general. I know people who do send through lots of detail beforehand, and that's okay. So there's no hard and fast rules about that. But I think it's unlikely the MP is going to have time to read what you send them if you send them a lot of stuff. But if it's really topical issue or a follow-up, an advisor might read it and brief them on it. But MPs are usually pretty busy, so they're not going to read huge documents. I can share a link to an email template you could use for a meeting request later on if you want me to do that. What else we do? We usually suggest in the email a few days or times that would be suitable to have a meeting, and we check the parliamentary sitting calendar so we know when our MP is going to be in Canberra, when they're going to be at home in their electorate, and then we'll pick some times that we're able to go and put it to them a few weeks ahead of time. Sometimes we're lucky and we can get an appointment the next week. Sometimes we have to wait a while. And if we don't hear back within a few days, like my local MP is pretty good now, but when we've gone to visit other MPs, sometimes you just don't hear anything. So you have to use the 5 Ps, okay? So I learnt this when I was a baby journalist a long time ago. So the 5 Ps are persistence, 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 persistence. So you just have to keep up the pressure and eventually you'll get an appointment. You've got to stay polite, but keep following up. So if you don't get a response to your email, make a phone call to the office and talk to the receptionist and call back if they don't get back to you, and just keep it up. If you keep getting knocked back but are offered an appointment with one of the advisors instead, take it. Talking to advisors is usually really good value, and they often know more than the MP themselves about issues, and they can advise you how to negotiate things, who else might be good to talk to in Parliament, or who might be an ally of your MP that might be able to help. And if it all goes well, they can also help you get a face-to-face appointment next time. Once you've got an appointment, you need to prepare, and this is vitally important. You can't wing it. Your appointment's going to be short, so you want to stick to one main issue with perhaps a couple of sub-issues in case you have enough time to get to them, but 2 to 3 issues tops. And do a little bit of research on your MP and their views in your topic area. You don't need to go overboard on this, but it really helps to know a bit about their recent activity in Parliament and what they've been doing in your electorate recently. Research your topic as well. You don't have to be an expert, but knowing what you're talking about helps. And then prepare a handout for them and talking notes for yourself. So you go in there with 2 documents, one to give them and then one for yourself, or a copy for each of you if you're in a group. So starting off with a compliment or a thank you about something they've done recently and the electorate goes down well. Then you want to introduce yourselves and why you're there, but be careful not to use up too much time on this. It's important to set the context and make a connection with them, but your time with them is really short. So just make a few dot points so you don't waffle on. You really need to be getting to the point of why you're there, because time can just disappear. Handouts are really good. MPs love them, but you want to keep it to just 1 to 2 pages tops. They won't read more than that, and they certainly can't read more than that and listen to you at the same time. So if you've got extensive documentation or a booklet or something that you want to leave with them or their advisor, you can do that, but don't try and go through it in the meeting. Have a summary document that you give them and that you're following, and make it clear and engaging. That's what's going to have the most impact. And I've heard that from a lot of sources. I've been to a couple of workshops on people who work in Canberra regularly, and they all say 1 pages. That's the way to go. 1 page summary, forget all the pages and pages of documentation. Graphs and photos are really good for engagement and making a point quickly. So what I usually do is I have one side I just take in a single page. One side of it is basically an agenda for what we want to cover during the meeting. And then the other side will have a cartoon or a graph or something like that on it. Photos are really good, and I'm sure your organisation would have lots of great photos you could use to take in if working with schools and kids. So the one at the top of this slide, the pie graph on greenhouse gas emissions, I took to one meeting, and I've taken it to show a few MPs actually, and they just pore over it. Most of them are not actually aware what the breakdown of our greenhouse gas emissions is, what sectors they come from, and here it's visual, so they get it in a few seconds. You don't have to spend a long time explaining it, they can just see it at a glance. And my MP and her staff looked at it for ages. It made a really strong visual point and got the point through pretty fast, that most of our rise in emissions is from gas. On another visit, I used the penguin cartoon to explain feedback loops, and that went down a hoot. It got their attention, it explains how feedback loops work, and they pinned it to their office notice board. I've given them other cartoons at other times. I try and find something funny that will get a bit of a laugh, but also make a point. On the handout that you're giving them, it's also good to give them a summary of your main points, questions and asks, so they know what you want to cover, what you want them to do, and you can use it to bring attention back to if things go off track. And as well as this, you want a document for yourself or an annotated copy for yourself and your group with the more detailed talking points so that you can keep on track and not forget things. You also need to decide ahead of time who's going to speak about what. So when you're actually in the meeting, you'll usually have been allocated 30 minutes, though this can be a bit shorter because they're usually rushing from one thing to the next. They can arrive late, get an important call, or get interrupted. You might be lucky and get longer, but I would prepare for 20 minutes just in case and prioritise the most important things and then have some extras that you can bring in if you get more time. And often the meetings don't go according to plan, so good notes will help you navigate this as well. It doesn't have to all happen exactly as you prepared. And if you've got your notes, you'll get out what you want to. Some MPs can be pretty cool and prickly, but most MPs are going to be really friendly and charming. They want you to like them. They want you to vote for them. But just a couple of warnings here. So even if they're quite relaxed and friendly, don't get tricked into thinking they're your friend, no matter how chummy they are. They're your MP. They've got a job to do. You want them to do it. Some MPs are very good at hijacking the agenda and wasting your time too, or they can have pretty persuasive arguments that shut you up and you sort of think, oh, what am I going to say now? But because you've only got a short time, you want to keep control of the meeting so you can deliver your message and get your asks out. So give the MP space to talk and answer questions, but if they start talking at you on and on, you can say to them, wow, that's interesting. However, what we're here today for is, and bring it back onto track. You know, they're often masters of sounding curious and interested in you personally. They can ask you about your kids or the sport, you know, who won the footy or whatever it is. But all these things, however interesting they are eating into your time. So you really want to have a couple of phrases to bring things back on track. Also, like everyone, MPs are swayed more by emotion than facts. So part of your engaging might be a personal story or an anecdote. We want them to understand how we feel and why we want them to act. However, don't get super dramatic. You have to stay professional. So you can tell your anecdotes, set the context, but stay polite, calm and professional. And if you happen to have an MP who's a bit confrontational or disparaging, and there are quite a few out there who are, don't let it get to you. Just breathe, stay calm and polite. If this is your local MP, you'll most likely want to speak to them again. So you want to build a trustful, ongoing relationship, not be dismissed as an angry nutter. So avoid just telling them stuff too. If you're just telling them stuff and they're just sitting there listening, you're not really having an engaging conversation. There's not any connection going on. So you want them to connect with your issues and concerns. So sometimes questions can work really well for that. So I would mix up your statements with questions, and particularly if they're fairly rigid in their views, rephrasing all your statements as questions can work really well, because there's a lot of MPs from all parties who are pretty dogmatic out there. And if you're trying to make, so just a couple of examples here. So instead of saying coal exports are going to dry up because other countries are moving away from coal, you could turn it into a question like, what plans do you have in place for export income after coal? Or instead of saying nuclear is expensive technology and won't be online for 20 to 30 years, you could ask, wouldn't a nuclear power station take 3 decades to build? how's that going to help us get emissions down by 2030? So put it on them to engage by answering your questions. And relative to the Solar Our Schools things, or your campaign, instead of just telling them about all the benefits of putting solar on schools, adding questions like, what's the downside of lower power bills for schools in the surrounding community? Wouldn't it save the government money in the longer term? Wouldn't the reduction in emissions help your government's targets? Don't you think this would be a community win that would reflect on you positively? Write some ideas down on your talking notes so that you can be prompted when you're in there. Now, the ask is the most important thing to communicate in your meeting. I cannot stress the importance of it enough. You can't just go in there, blab at them, and then walk away. You've got to tell them what you want them to do on your behalf. So this is where we get action. But the ask has got to be achievable. So MPs can't make legislation or policy on their own. So you need to know what their particular power is in the party or as an individual, and tailor the ask accordingly. So, you know, is your ask appropriate for this level of government? Is your MP in government or opposition? Are they a backbencher or a minister? All these things are going to have an impact on what they're able to do for you. So apologies, this slide's a bit rough. I just added it in at the last minute and I'll just go through pretty fast. So the difference between Labor and the Coalition, and this is very vague and may not be entirely accurate, but it's my understanding of it, is that Labor has a relatively clear hierarchy and rank and file members get a say in who the leader is these days. But out of the parliamentary MPs, all the parliamentary MPs are part of the caucus, and that's where they thrash out issues and vote. So away from the public, they'll debate all those sort of issues. Within that group, there's a smaller group that's the shadow cabinet, which is all the MPs with areas of responsibility. And then within the shadow cabinet, there's a senior cabinet of about a dozen people who have the most power within the party. And once they've voted on an issue within the party, in Parliament, every MP in the Labor Party will vote the same way. So they'll all vote for or against a particular piece of legislation. That has advantages. It's like the best and worst of democracy. The majority view prevails. You sign up for that so they can be expelled if they don't do it. The Coalition, on the other hand, is much looser and their power structure is a bit less clear. They've got, as a coalition, it's not just the Liberals and Nationals. There's a whole lot of little minor groups in there as well, making up the coalition, who all want their own input and can refuse to knuckle under what they're being told to do. They cross the floor from time to time. So there's no point asking a Labor MP to cross the floor, for example, as your ask, because they won't do it. They can't do it. But you can ask them to do lots of other things. You can ask Liberal MPs to cross the floor on issues. They probably won't, but you can ask them and you may be able to persuade them to. So some things you can ask MPs to do, to speak to the minister on your behalf. And if they do it during question time in Parliament, that is really powerful. It goes on the public record and sometimes the media can pick up on it, and then you get stories about that as well. Making a speech in Parliament can have the same effect. So they're really strong things. You can ask any MP to do that, any backbencher from any party. And you can look up questions, parliamentary questions online. I had a lesson on them from Fiona Patton, who's a Victorian independent in the upper house down here. But they can be used to great effect. So I would strongly suggest asking them to do things like that, or to make a speech about your issue and the benefits of it, because it all goes on the public record. They can lobby their colleagues in caucus to support your issue and try and find their allies, get a big group of people together to try and change the views and make it more of an issue in the party. They can organise town hall events in your electorate. You can ask them to do that. We've done that quite a lot, and we've had lots of ministers or shadow ministers, mostly because I've got a Labor MP, come and speak on Zoom during COVID, or actually in Parliament, in face-to-face in town halls. And we've managed to tack onto that. We've asked to speak to those shadow ministers personally. And had a bit of a round table either before or after the town hall event. So that can be pretty valuable as well, getting to talk directly to the person in the shadow ministry. So if your issue is in a different level of government, you can ask your MP to introduce you to someone who can help there, or put pressure on your state members if you need that, rather than your federal minister. I've got some examples, but I realise I'm going over time here, so I'll save those maybe for the question and answer bit. So after the meeting, it's a good idea to send a follow-up about what you talked about, and then keep following up, keep them accountable. Follow up to find out if they took the action they agreed to take for you. Try and get another appointment to find out how they're going. So there's lots of value. We exchange information with them. They learn what we're thinking. We gain insights about what's going on behind the scenes. And there's an opportunity to develop an ongoing relationship, which is pretty positive. So we can influence change. Okay, this is just a few of the people that I've visited since the last election. And there's not time to give you stories about all of these now, but if there's anyone that stands out there that you want to ask me about later, you can. Most of them are Labor, because I live in Victoria and we have mostly Labor MPs down here. The most interesting meetings I've had, however, with Zali Steggall. I had an hour with her last year, and with Fiona Patton as well. And I haven't visited any of the moderate federal libs like Katie Allen, Tim Wilson, Trent Zimmerman, but I have friends who have, and so I know a little bit about what visiting them is like too. So the first time's scary, but after that, it's not so scary. And my federal member, I'll just whiz through this because I've gone on a bit long. I've visited her a lot of times, and at the beginning she knew almost nothing about climate or anything that was going on in the world with climate, but now she's a major climate advocate within Labor. Our electorate's pretty strong in this, and lots of people visit her and push her along, and everybody that does makes a difference, pushes it along just a little bit more. She actually moved for Labor to declare a climate emergency in the ALP national platform, and she's done lots of things for us in our electorate. So have we got time to do the breakout activity? Do you want to do that now, or do you want to skip it and move on and do it later?
I think it would be good to do a little activity just to make sure everyone's still buzzy and listening in. So why don't we do the first one? What are the barriers that might prevent you from visiting your MP? And we'll chuck everyone in a breakout room for 4 minutes. So think about what are the barriers that you have to preventing you from visiting your MP, psychological, physical, logistical, and we'll brainstorm that in breakout rooms. If Laura, you're happy to proceed to put people in the breakout room.
Yeah, and you could think about how you might overcome those as well.
Thank you, Sue. So we should all be starting to get an ask to go to a breakout room.
But if it's not going to show, it's not going to show. And so I hope everyone got something out of that discussion about what your barriers are to actually going to visit your MP or making the appointment. And I hope you've learnt something from my presentation as well. Sorry, I stumbled over a few bits of it, but I'll make the slides available so that Heidi can share them with you later. So thank you.
We had a couple of questions you were going to answer just before we roll into the next part of the presentation, Sue.
Okay, so the first question, somebody posted that what do you do if MPs don't respond to your emails? And somebody saying that they'd never had a response to an email. Well, there's two things you can do about that. And the first one I would say is to keep on their backs. You've got to not give up. You've really got to be persistent. So if you send an email and you don't get a response after 2 or 3 weeks, write again, send it again and say, I sent you this email on such and such a date. I haven't got a response. What I want to know is this. And just keep doing it. Or call the office and say, I sent you an email, I didn't get a reply. And that will usually get things going. There are some MPs who are pretty woeful at doing it, but there are a lot of MPs that you wouldn't expect, who will reply personally to emails. So you've just got to keep on their backs. We've just got to keep them accountable all the time. The other problem you can get sometimes is that you do get a response, but it's just a form letter. And when you compare it with other people's responses, they're all identical. So that's no good either. So I would be writing back to them with that as well and saying, thank you for your response. Like, always stay polite. Thank you for your response. However, you didn't address my concerns. What I want to know is this. And just keep at them. I've got a couple of templates on our website that will help with this if you want to have a look. When maybe Heidi can share the links to that in her next mail out, and you can have a look at what we've got there.
Great, thank you. And there was one question from Marie that we thought we'd answer before we moved on, which was, what do you do if your MP is making excuses claiming that they're taking climate action when they're clearly not?
Okay, so MPs can't always do a lot on their own. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by taking action when they're not. The thing that comes to mind is people like Trent Zimmerman, Tim Wilson, Katie Allen, Filinski, can't remember his first name, but those moderate liberals who all say, we believe in climate action, you know, we really want change, and then they vote with the government every single time. There was actually a story this morning about that on one of the news media, I can't remember which. So we can't trust them, you know, they're just saying that to get votes, to get re-elected. And a lot of those moderate MPs are on pretty slim margins. So if they're not doing anything, we've got to hold them to account. Once again, like, call them out for not crossing the floor. All those Liberal MPs could cross the floor and vote for climate. They could vote to support Zali Steggall's bill or some other sort of climate action. They don't have to go along with Scott Morrison. And if they're saying they don't agree with him, then they need to, you know, walk the talk, vote with their feet, and not just spout hollow words. Does that help? I don't know.
On mute. So thank you, Sue, for your presentation. That's great. We'll have some more time for questions at the end, but I'm going to zip through a little bit of extra detail about what we can provide for you in terms of MP engagement scaffolding. So if you want to just pop any questions in the chat while I just get my PowerPoint up and running. So I'm going to share screen. This one. Share. Oops, there you go. Okay, can you see that? Excellent, thank you. So meet your MP. Our federal election strategy is about focused on creating bipartisan support for climate action, as Nick mentioned, with rapid urgent progress for short-term and medium-term targets, and reframing climate action and the transition to a net zero economy as a valuable opportunity for Australia. So, and here we have the lovely Amanda from Wentworth, who has a media spokes and MP engagement person for us last year. And I'm going to be featuring some photos of the amazing parents that we've been working with throughout the presentation. So the strategy of how we're approaching our federal election strategy is we're raising up parents' voices, and we're mobilizing and empowering our active volunteers, and we're localizing our national asks. So there's Jasper, who's joined us on the call, and here's our amazing group from Darwin. So the tone and style of our campaign is positive, respectful, and solutions focused. And we are proudly non-partisan. It's a core value of all our Australian Parents for Climate Action work. So it's about finding common ground and making climate action inclusive of all sides of politics. And here you can see Susie and I meeting with Sarah Mitchell, the New South Wales Liberal Education Minister, with Clover Moore, and Jess Scully early this year, I think. So non-partisan means not biased or for or against any particular politician or political group. We do not support or oppose any party or politician. However, we do support and oppose policies. So in short, we talk about policies, not politics. Again, the Darwin local group on their way to meet Michael Gunner. What does non-partisan not look like? We don't insult, deride, make fun, or make caricatures of, misquote parties or politicians. We don't overdo it on the criticism. Saying something plainly and politely and clearly is good enough. We don't amplify partisan groups or political groups backing particular candidates. We don't target one political party or group in our communications, and we don't tell people how to vote. So here we are meeting with Tanya Plebisek on Zoom. So what if I'm involved in something that may be considered partisan? Well, if you are doing something considered partisan and you're going to be, you want to be an AP4CA MP or media spokesperson, please do let us know. You can then work, do those MP engagement meetings, but not as a representative of AP4CA. There is Sharon from Armidale local group, who's been very active recently in both MP, media spokes and councillor engagement. So how do I become an AP4CA media or MP spokesperson? Well, we do these trainings, but we can't do them all the time. So we also have an online training spokesperson course that will take you on a journey to understand our federal election strategy with a much deeper dive into those details on that, how to have great climate conversations, how to create a narrative of your own for media and MP pitches, how to localize solar our schools pitches for media and MP engagement, how to be a media spokesperson, how to meet with your MP, and more. So where can you find that? On our website it's on the front page, actually, AP4CA Parent Spokes Online Training. And there we have the lovely Leanne in Southwest Queensland. So how do you shape your pitch to your MP? There's Bridget in Mackellar. Well, firstly, we talk about communicating with Conservatives. We are very careful about how we communicate. So the research shows a Conservative person's political affiliations and ideology makes them more likely to deny the science of climate change. So how do we reach them and change their minds on climate? We use trusted messengers. We give them space and time to digest information, and we give them learnings, if possible, in places that will reinforce those learnings, so place-based learnings. There are three simple ways that research shows. That's trusted messages, space and time to digest information, and place-based learning. And there we have Yolanda from the Sunshine Coast. Meeting with your MP, research them to start with. So whether it's state or federal, find out what their portfolio is. How long have they been in this position? When were they elected? And what were the results in the last election? Who was the opposition in their seat? Do they have kids? What are their concerns on climate? What are the main issues in their electorate that you could weave into your pitch? There we have our Newcastle group creating a banner. So we will now work on your initial or follow-up approach to your MP. So this is where I want you to get a pen and paper out, and we're actually going to do an action at the end of this 10 minutes. So I want you to start by doing some narrative training. There's our wonderful Deanna, who won the award recently from Westfield. So narrative training Why? Parents make great spokespeople because we have a moral responsibility to protect our children. We've seen the impacts of bushfires, floods, and rising temperatures. We observe other governments around the world taking action on climate, but continue to be disappointed by our own federal government being out of step with global action on climate. And as parents, we can authentically share our concerns for the future. Our politicians are there to represent us, to shepherd this future in, and we don't need to be a climate science expert to want climate change. And there's Louise in Sydney. So narrative training, why your personal story is powerful. Everyone has a unique story to tell. Being honest and personal and authentic cuts through the noise of mass media. It makes your story relatable, and the more personal the story, the more global it is. So Barack Obama was famous for using this public narrative technique, the story of self, the story of now, and the story of us, developed by Marshall Gans. So we're going to have a go at creating a little story of us, a story of self, story of now, and story of us. So I want you to get started by taking a moment to write down a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? How many kids have you got? What's your job? Now share with us why you care about climate. Is there a single incident, a bushfire, or the special needs of a child, or a person, or a fact that enlightened you, or was it the slow creep of anxiety? Try and make your story vivid with details to make it more engaging. So I want you to just write a couple of dot points. These are going to inform an approach to an MP that we're going to make in the next 10 minutes. So if you can spend just a couple of minutes writing a little bit about yourself. Pop it in an email or a piece of paper. And give me the thumbs up in the chat when you've got something down. Just a couple of dot points. We've got one from Laura. She's ready to go. Thanks, Laura. Jasper's done. Excellent. So that's just right. Just a couple of dot points. You'll have more time to build this out in your own time, but that's the beginning of your story of you. And here's a lot of yous, a lot of us from our Solar Our Schools campaign last year. The next one is why now? Why is this so important that you want other people to hear what you have to say? Take another moment to add on to your little scribbled notes or your email. Why now? So what do you feel is at stake if we don't act now? Why is what is happening right now, the incident, an important turning point for you? What is it about this moment that's important, that's life-changing? And remember that people are often overwhelmed with news about the world. So this is really your little moment to grab their attention. It's good to put it in terms of shared values. What are the values that you're driven by to act that other people will relate to? Are they beauty, compassion, citizenship, community, fairness, faith, justice, love, loyalty, optimism, peace, responsibility, security, stability, wealth? So think about a core value that you could weave into why now? Why are you acting now? Why are you driven now? And again, we'll give you a few minutes and then give me a thumbs up when you've got something. Hannah's speedy, Leah, Nick, excellent. Okay, so the third part of your dot points on your email is why us? So in this context, we're talking about why you and the MP. So what is it about this moment? It's a time to be specific. What is the call to action you're asking people to do? So what are you asking the MP to do? It's what Marshall Gans calls urgent and hopeful action. In this context, it's the specific ask to a politician, such as embracing renewable energy, setting an ambitious climate target, or agreeing not to approve any new gas. This is your invitation for your MP to be part of the solution. So in a few moments, just write down the why us, and in this case, it's your MP. Thank you. And then give me another thumbs up. You've already got some thumbs up, super fast. Speediest writers in the West or East. Excellent. Okay, so we're actually going to do some breakout rooms. So I want you to practice your 30-second pitch. It's your elevator pitch, which is a film term, which basically means you're getting in an elevator. In this case, it's with your federal MP, and you've got 30 seconds to pitch to him why, or her, I should say, your little why you, why now, why us moment. So Laura, if you wouldn't mind shunting people back over to the breakout rooms. See you, Xavier. Keep in touch, and we'll do a quick 30-second elevator pitch using your why you, why now, and why us. So we're back. We all back? I think we are. So ding, 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 the elevator's arrived and the MP has gotten out of the elevator, and that was your moment. So I hope you used it. So we're going to have to fly through the rest of the presentation, but the next thing I want you to do is very quickly take a moment to write a dot point about why Solar Our Schools would be good for your local area. What economic benefits can you envisage that we could create through Solar Our Schools in your community, both regional or state? Yeah, just let's do that. Maybe don't outline the major threats to your area for climate change right now, or provide a local case study. We won't have time for that. Just write down one or two things that you think, knowing you're based on Solar Our Schools, why it would be good for your area. Sorry, Delia, that you were in a room pitching the elevator by yourself. It was good practice time, probably. You got ghosted by your pretend MP.
She did well. She managed it in 12 seconds.
Okay, so write down that. Can you write down that one thing that you think would be good about Solar Our Schools for your local area? And when you've done that, give me a thumbs up. Okay, we've got the first one. So I'm going to keep moving. And there we are with Chris Bowen, which was a great meeting, I have to say. Lots of insight from Chris Bowen about messaging on climate. So meeting with your MP, the first thing we need you to clarify is, are you meeting as yourself or as a representative or supporter of AP4CA? So if you want to go and meet as a representative or supporter of AP4CA, we do ask that you fall under and meet out the branding, the style of communication and asks that align with our strategy, as I've outlined briefly here, but more of that detail is in the Spokesperson program online. If you don't want to stick to this strategy, then we kindly ask that you meet as an individual and not connect the meeting with AP4CA. Thank you. And there is, and then if you are having a meeting, please do reach out to AP4CA staff. Let us know about your meeting. We can have a phone call or Zoom with you to give you some specific advice in relation to your meeting. We can provide the right Solar Our Schools pitch and help you shape a cover page with materials specific to your federal MP. And we may even be able to attend the meeting with you on Zoom for additional support. And there's Nick meeting with Sally Sutu just recently in Reid, which is a marginal electorate. And then after the meeting, please make sure you grab a photo with your MP or a screenshot of your Zoom meeting. Send them our Solar Our Schools submission document and any other materials you have promised, and contact AP4CA staff and let them know how you went. And we can provide any additional follow-up information your MP requested, see if there's any follow-up lobbying to be done or media opportunities that we can generate out of your meeting. And there's Laura with Libby Coker just the last few weeks, a week ago. So we do have time for about 4 minutes of chat before I get you to actually do a real life action to top out the night. So do we have a couple of questions, Laura, that we have been thrown that we could do?
Yeah, I might throw a question either to yourself or Nick. There was a question in the chat about what happens if you're involved with one of the voices of campaigns.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to that. So, I mean, maybe you're already involved, or maybe you've heard of, or maybe you haven't heard of, but these amazing campaign groups that are locally led, voices of, in inverted commas, for lots of different electorates. Many of them are more partisan than we are either able to be, or indeed than we've decided to be as Australian Parents for Climate Action. And in those instances, we can't necessarily, and we make the decision not to participate in communications or activities that specifically promote a candidate or a party, if that was to happen. However, there might be town halls or a climate conversation or a community event that the voices of groups are facilitating. And that's not necessarily a partisan communication or activity. And so in those instances, a sort of democratic activity would be fantastic to encourage Australian Parents for Climate Action support and supporters towards. But there is that line that we unfortunately need to draw. Partly it's charity law, and partly because we are committed to non-partisan, bipartisan focus. So we do not necessarily get involved directly in those types of moments where the voices of groups may be backing particular candidates. And I encourage everyone who's involved in those organisations and in those moments to go hell for leather. Like, I'm loving it, it's great. It's just not necessarily something we can put the Australian Parents for Climate Action badge on. If you yourself are someone who's very involved in that and you're very publicly associated with a particular candidate, maybe you're even involved in a candidate's campaign, in those instances, it's important to I think it's important to be honest with your MP and to let your MP know, and potentially we might need to just check and maybe talk to the staff with Australian Parents for Climate Action about whether we'd approach that engagement as an Australian Parents for Climate Action facilitated conversation, or whether you could just be someone who mentions that you're an Australian Parents for Climate Action member, but isn't necessarily representing Australian Parents for Climate Action in that conversation. So those are that's a bit of a long answer, but basically we can't get involved in anything that supports particular candidates or parties, simply because we need to make sure we can talk to everybody. And politicians have very long memories. They seem to hold grudges, so we definitely want to make sure we stick to that line. The second thing is we definitely want to make sure you can be involved, but let's have a conversation if you're unsure about what relationship you might have with a particular politician. I hope that helps.
There was one more question to Sue. Any tips on chasing follow-up from an MP on something they've said they will take on during the meeting? From Maddie. Oh, you're on mute, Sue.
So the question was...
any tips on chasing follow-up from an MP on something they said they will take on during a meeting?
I think you need to bypass the email in that instance and call the office directly and try and leave messages for them. You can write as well, but that's hard if they haven't followed up on something. But I think you've just got to keep on their backs, and it's the same thing: persistence, persistence, persistence. They're busy people; just have to keep after them.
Excellent. Anything else? Any other questions, Laura, that we've missed out?
No, I feel like we've covered them.
Marie, did you feel like your question was adequately answered before? You did do a follow-up statement.
Thanks, Heidi. And Sue, thanks very much for the answer. I was asking the question about the excuses. If you feel like your MP's just giving excuses that they are taking climate action, and what I meant is that they're just towing the party line or saying that they're meeting and beating targets and giving you stuff like that. Do you bother pointing out that that's incorrect and you disagree with what they're saying? Or do you, sort of for the sake of relationship building, not sort of go into arguments about that and just come back to your specific asks or something else?
Yeah, I would do the latter. Just come back to your specific asks, because you can't turn the whole party around. So you've just got to focus on what's achievable. So bite off the chunk that's achievable, that you can actually get them to support, and go with that. Yeah, get them to speak in Parliament about solar our schools, or put pressure on to make it part of their policy, or whatever it is, but make it a small chunk.
Thanks very much.
Okay, great. So the last thing we're going to do tonight is in the chat, I have put an e-card, a Christmas e-card for you to send to your politician. So using the narrative pitch that you made, I want you to draft an email tonight and send it to your local politician asking for a meeting because it's almost the end of the year. We have no time to waste. We have a federal election looming and the time is now to get a meeting with your federal MP. You can send them a message tonight with the Christmas card and then follow up over the next few weeks. You might not be able to get something before Christmas, but hopefully in the new year, we can get the ball rolling and we can help you. We'll be back at work on the 10th of January, and I'm just been asked to provide the e-card again. So it's in the chat. I'll put it in there again. It should be uploading now.
So someone's just asked in the chat how much time you'd allow to prepare for an MP meeting.
Well, it depends on how much time you have. But I think doing a bit of research on your MP, you know, half an hour would be good. And then coming up with an agenda, you know, an agreed agenda, maybe another 20 minutes. And then, you know, having a chat with us and talking through the main talking points, half an hour, you know, so you're probably talking about a good couple of hours really to read the documents and be really clear on your messaging, but it's not 2 hours in a block. I mean, would you agree with that, Sue? Could they expedite that kind of preparation in 2 hours?
Yeah, I think so. And the first time's always going to take longer and then you get quicker as you go. The way I do it with my friends is we generally put up a Google Doc that we can all contribute to, and that way we can share the workload a bit, and we'll do a table and just insert things in. But you've got pre-prepared material, so that should help a lot as well.
Yeah, so if you have a look at that Spokesperson training program on our website as well, all the main talking points and our ask for AP4CA are there as well. So you can basically copy and paste a lot of the material. So that is our 9:30 end of the call. I do hope that people are saying they cannot see the e-card link. I've uploaded it twice. Can you see it? If you can't see it, I will email it out to you. Yeah, I will email it out to you with Sue's material after tomorrow so that you can get onto it, and do CC or BCC me in to email to your MP, just so that I can get the satisfaction that you're doing it. Be like my Christmas present. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, particularly Sue, for coming tonight and so generously sharing like your personal experiences, as well as the big picture insight into how our political system works. And I'm really excited to be leading parents around Australia to meet with their MPs in the lead up to the federal election and being media spokespeople. So please do stay in touch. And thanks again for spending your Monday night being political geeks with us. All right.